Hello, everybody. So she gave me a good introduction, so I don't have to introduce myself. I passed out some of my pinwheel pins earlier today, and so if you're not aware of my group, you'll have to Google it, because if you go on Facebook, they'll censor you. So you can Google or DuckDuckGo Pinwheels for Vaccine Injury Awareness and join my group. I've also recently started another group that I hope will widen our audience and bring more awareness to it, which is called, and I have to look because it's so new, it's kind of a mouthful, Pharmaceutical Injury Awareness and Medical Freedom Advocacy, or PAMFA. So since we have Antifa, let's have PAMFA. That actually means something. This all started, my pinwheel group all started many years ago because I could see where all this was going. And sadly, it's no shock to see that things have transpired the way they have. But today I also see that we're pushing back and more people are fighting and our numbers are growing. And I go out there and I talk to people all the time, and I do use my pin, that does help. And you know, I put a pinwheel garden in my yard and my neighbors came out of the woodwork, and I realized we're not as alone as we think. And now with this COVID thing coming on, I think a lot more people are starting to be aware, hey, I don't think I want some untested vaccine. And a lot of people aren't on board with that. So hopefully that will help us out. I began my campaign for vaccine injury awareness during October of 2015 because I wanted to create a positive way for us to educate the community with less backlash than we had been facing. I wanted to give our community a tool to talk to others and to educate them. So through hours of careful research, I looked into colors and symbolic associations, such as a black-eyed Susan for justice, or even the Jewish star that represented isolation and persecution. I came up with the symbol of childhood joy, motion, and promise, and the yellow pinwheel memorial gardens were born. Some of you are aware of it and have participated, and again, if you haven't, I hope you will look it up. So today we have an opportunity before us to turn the tides, and I know that it seems daunting, and I think we have a real opportunity to make our voices matter. I've said that COVID-19 is a little red pill that they never intended, and I believe that. As people start to question the push for mandatory vaccines that haven't even been made yet, and rush through your doctor's office using unproven technology, people are questioning what's behind it all, and they see this corrupt system that we have. And more people are beginning to see that maintaining their right to decide is more important than they ever realized. Many are seeing that now they might be coming for them. So Gates, like the sign in front here, and all the money and power behind it. This sign is actually really good for what I'm saying. So now is the time to speak out. But how can you effectively do that? By sharing your story or that of others, but that isn't quite enough. So beyond that, and this goes along with what Katherine was talking about in part of her speech, there is an even more basic and important message. You have the right to decide what happens to your body. This is the foundation of inalienable rights. This is in the Constitution. They are granted to you not only by the Constitution, but by the very law of existence itself. You must never concede, no matter what. You're gonna have to fight for this. If you give that right up, you then become a slave and you are no longer free. These are the things that revolutions are fought for. We are not born to be slaves. None of us were ever born to be slaves. None of us. In any way. We are not born to be smothered either by rules or regulations or by masks, anesthetized by drugs, poisoned by our environment, sickened to save humanity, or forced to do any of the things that they have us do for the perceived benefit of others. We could talk about science and data and risks and toxins that make up vaccines, medication risks, flawed testing, all the things that we talk about all day to each other. But the reality is, when speaking out in public, the one main thing we can and need to focus on is that we are free to decide our own destiny. We are free to decide what we want to do with our own body, and that is all. It doesn't matter what the data says. It doesn't matter what's in the vaccines. It doesn't matter if they hurt you or even if they don't hurt you. It doesn't matter because it's your body and you have the right to choose. So when it comes to medical freedom, there is no, you are free to decide what happens to your body, unless we want to do something to your body to help someone else. Then it's up to the government to decide, and you don't have a choice. That's not true. They cannot change that. They cannot change your inalienable right, and you have to fight that. What happens to your body in this country, you are free to decide. You are free to go where you want and do what you want, because if you aren't, then you're a prisoner and you're a slave. You have bodily integrity that you need to fight for. Not too long ago, a case reached the courts of Pennsylvania, and it set a precedent used often by pro-choice groups to support bodily autonomy. But in my opinion, this case doesn't really work as well for them as it does for us, because it really deals with bodily integrity, and there's a difference. Where autonomy says you can decide what to do to your body, bodily integrity says you have the right to decide what is done to your body. You see, in this case, McFall versus Shimp, McFall required a bone marrow transplant to survive. Shimp was a match, but after learning about the donation procedure, he decided he didn't feel comfortable enough and refused to participate. Desperate to live, McFall sued Shimp, and in the end, it was ruled that no matter how much we may want Shimp to save McFall's life, it is his right to refuse and his right to protect his own body as he sees fit. He is under no obligation to do anything to save another's life, which was cited as a constitutional right in this case. And consequently, McFall died. Did you hear that? You are under no obligation to do anything to your body to save another's life. Surely this applies to vaccines, which has only a perceived benefit of possibly saving a life. If they couldn't force Shimp to do something to directly save a person, how can they force us to do something that only has, maybe a tiny little possible nebulous way might save a life? In fighting this topic, I think I might have missed my spot. So as we face the mandates and regulations, and I lost my place. Well, the point is, as I usually just go off the cuff. See, I'm obviously better off the cuff. We cannot allow this to happen. So I decided to run for state rep. Wait for it. I will tell you, the things that Katherine was saying about our government are true. They do not work for you. So what we need to do is to make sure we are getting out there and educating our lawmakers about these things, because as she said, half the times they don't even read the bills. They don't know what's going on. The lawmakers work for you. We need to take back our government. So when I started to run for office, I started to see how much this is about money. It's all about money, money, money. It's not about you, and it's not about your health. They don't care. This is a career. People are talking to me, oh, you want to further your career. I'm not doing this for a career. I'm doing this because I care. Okay? So I learned that our lawmakers are not what you necessarily think. However, there are good ones out there. But it's your job to get out there and educate these people, okay? By going out there and educating your lawmakers, you may be swinging more than one vote. If I get elected, I'm one vote, I'm one voice, I'm one person, and I'll have to deal with all sorts of garbage I don't want to, okay? But you can make a difference for more than one vote, maybe more than two, maybe more than three, but you've got to work. This is a revolution, okay? You have to go out there and speak. We need more people in this. You need to go to your communities and organize groups of people. Use my Pinwheel campaign. I have been able to organize lots of my neighbors who believe the same way I do, and I had no idea. So go out there and do that, okay? Right now is our time, and you have to speak out. When I started my campaign, I told everybody on there, this is our time to be brave. And Del Bigtree made that our mantra. So I want all of you, now is the time. Get out there and be brave.
Let's thank Laura again. Thank you so much. Our next speaker has been practicing integrative medicine since 1988. He is the owner of Bioenergy Medical Center and board certified in emergency medicine, integrative and holistic medicine, as well as anti-aging and regenerative medicine with a certification in Shalathon therapy. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine and Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs, as well as a member of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, the Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs, American College for the Advancement of Medicine, and the International Lyme-Associated Disease Society. He has been a Defeat Autism Now practitioner since 2007. Please welcome Dr. James Neuenschwander.
Yeah, I'm one of those guys that knows what Lyme disease really is. And, also somebody that's been targeted by his medical board, so we know all about ex-legislative rules. So, for those of you that don't know me, I am not a politician, I am not a lawyer, and I am definitely not a preacher. What I am is a physician who has spent the last 30 plus years helping my patients discover and determine the underlying cause of their symptoms so that they can find wellness. But that's not what I'm here today to talk about, wellness. No, I'm here today because I am pissed off. And I am tired of watching governments take away our medical freedoms. You know, I went to bed one night in a Democratic Michigan. I woke up the next day to find that my governor had taken power for herself, declaring herself the sole proprietor of life in Michigan, rendering our elected Congress completely or nearly completely useless, and unfortunately, a state in which they remain. So the governor, in all defense, she did this because she wanted to protect the people of Michigan using the best science available. Or so she said. When does the best science available tell you the way to manage a pandemic is to lock up the healthy people who are at essentially no risk from this disease and intentionally expose those at greatest risk? What good science tells you is you let healthy people get the disease, get immune to this, use that immunity to protect the people who are at risk. Is that what she did? I don't think so. What good science never tells you to do is to expose the very people that are most at risk from this disease. And yet, that is what our governor did. By executive order, she dictated that all COVID-positive nursing home residents discharged from hospitals have to be taken back to their nursing home. A nursing home in which they cannot be isolated. A nursing home in which there is not adequate personal protective equipment. And a nursing home in which science has told you if you introduce one patient with COVID, that nursing home will have about 85 to 86% of those patients getting COVID. As a result, over 2,000 nursing home residents died of COVID in the state of Michigan. Fully 1/3 of all the deaths in Michigan were in nursing home residents. hospitals that were near these nursing homes found themselves overwhelmed by these sick elderly people. Yes, somebody needs to investigate this. Somebody needs to stop this. She still has power. You know, Governor Cuomo did the same thing in New York, but after 3 weeks, he figured out what a boneheaded idea it was. And he rescinded his order. Not our governor. She doubled down. That's another story, my friend. That's another story. Listen, if we know anything about COVID, it's that it is deadly to elderly people that have comorbid conditions, i.e. nursing home residents. We know that the median age of death in Michigan, that means the death rate, the age at which at least 50% of these people are at, was 78. 50% or more of people that died of COVID were 78 or older. And she did nothing to protect those people. But now we're faced once again with this idea of medical mandates and restrictions on our freedoms. The same governor that made this mess has hired an army of Gestapo agents to go out and call you and knock on your door and say, oh, by the way, you may have been exposed to somebody that may have been exposed to somebody who didn't have any symptoms, but they tested positive for COVID, and now you need to lock yourself down for 14 days and give up all your freedoms. And if ever they do come up with a vaccine for COVID, it will probably be mandated. You want your kids to go to school? No. Do you want a driver's license? Do you want to get on an airplane? You're going to have to show evidence of this vaccination. Who decided that it was a good idea to give up the personal sovereignty that was laid out in the Declaration of Independence and guaranteed by our Constitution? And all this for a virus that has a death rate, according to the CDC, of 0.26%. I am not minimizing anybody that has died from this virus, anybody that has suffered from this virus. It has been a horrible thing for some people. But this happens every year. We always have people that die of infectious diseases in the United States, tens and hundreds of thousands of people. Since when did this virus rise to the level that it's time to destroy our Constitution and our personal rights? Well, let's take a look at the track record of some of the medical mandates that most of us know a lot about. The vaccine mandates. Because of the way we're trained as doctors, okay, we're pretty much brainwashed. The gurus tell us what to do. We accept it. We learn early on. Don't question the gurus. We're all sleep deprived. Everybody around us is saying the same thing over and over again. That's called brainwashing. Even once we get out of our training into medical practice, we don't have the time to go home at night and investigate everything we do. We have to trust the experts to tell us what to do. And because of that, you have a whole bunch of doctors that believe that vaccines have all been through inert, placebo-controlled, double-blind, multi-center, large studies before they're ever approved by the FDA or put on the schedule by the Advisory Committee of Immunization Practices, the ASIP. Most physicians believe that vaccine injuries are rare, maybe 1 in a million, and that vaccines have been the savior of mankind. But when you do the research, you find none of that is true. Vaccine science is a joke. Vaccine safety studies compare one vaccine to another vaccine, or a vaccine to some of the toxic ingredients that are in vaccines. There's never been a vaccine that has gone through a pre-licensure, inert placebo, double-blind controlled study, ever. So, the CDC, in order to deal with this, because they know there's a problem here, they created the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS, in 1988. VAERS is also a joke. 2011 study from Harvard said less than 1% of all injuries are reported to VAERS. There are doctors out there that give thousands of vaccines a year who have never reported a single injury to VAERS. So the CDC also set up something called the Vaccine Safety Data Lake. This is real-time access to about 10 million medical records so they can see signals of injury. They can go in and say, hey, is this causing that? But after a couple of private physicians used the VSD to show that there was a link between DPT and autism, the CDC took that away from us, made it a private company, outside the reach of FOIA requests and individual research. But make no mistake about it, people are injured by vaccines. I have seen it with my own eyes. I've seen healthy, bright-eyed, clean-skinned, happy, great eye content babies and toddlers disappear.
Right?
Become glassy-eyed, eczematous, bloaty belly, dark circles under the eyes, all because of one or more vaccines. I've seen adolescents, usually straight-A students, great athletes, who all of a sudden can't walk. They have no coordination. They can't stand up. They have brain fog. They have panic attacks and anxiety when they never had it before after receiving an HPV vaccine. And I've seen adults who lose strength in their arm or their leg after receiving a flu vaccine and spend an entire year rehabbing themselves back to almost where they were before, only to be told by their employer that if they wanted a job, they had to get another flu shot. So, in response to all these growing concerns over vaccine safety in 2012, Congress passed the Institute of Medicine, these are a bunch of super geniuses on vaccines, to answer the question, is our vaccine schedule safe?
No.
Do we have healthier children because we follow this vaccine schedule? Simple question. Well, in 2013, they published a report that said, I don't know. Why? Because there has never been a vaxxed versus unvaxxed study. And they admonished the CDC for not doing one. So in response, the CDC convened their group of experts to study whether you could do something like that, a vaxxed versus unvaxxed study, in an ethical way using existing databases like the VSD. Makes sense. So they published their report in 2015 and said, yep, this is how you can do it. They even gave a specific example of how to do a study to see, does the vaccine schedule increase your risk of asthma? Reasonable question.
Will you put this in the...
What's happened? Sorry, at this point I tried to do chirping of crickets, but I'm not very good at that.
But for some
Nothing.
reason not working.
That's what's happened.
Take Keegan's.
We have had 2 small private studies that have been published since then, comparing vaccinated to unvaccinated children. And what they found was that vaccinated children had higher rates of allergies, asthma, eczema, ear infections, ADHD, and yes, Virginia, autism. This is what the government is mandating. Now, you add in a COVID vaccine that's going to be rushed into production without any real safety testing, like there ever was on any other vaccine, and you know this is going to be a disaster. We are all terrified about what this vaccine is going to do to the people's immune systems. We also know this vaccine is not going to be tested on the elderly. It's not going to be tested on the immunocompromised. It's not going to be tested on the sick. It's going to be tested on healthy volunteers. And then it's going to be recommended to everyone. And remember, almost everyone that gets this disease either has no symptoms or minimal symptoms. It's a small percentage of people that get sick, and even less that die. They're going to be mandating this vaccine to hundreds of millions of people, most of whom will have no risk from the disease, without having any idea what this vaccine is going to do to those people over the long run. You can't determine an outcome like autoimmunity because it takes months to years to develop. You can't figure that out if you spent an entirety of 6 months developing your damn vaccine. If you're ever in doubt of the junk science that they use to create our vaccine schedule, I challenge each and every one of you to come with me to the next ASAP meeting. It's a joke. I have watched them determine that a vaccine doesn't work. The pneumonia vaccine doesn't work. They didn't take it off the schedule. They said they'd leave it up to the doctor's discretion. Are you kidding me? We assume that if they have it on the schedule, it's safe and effective. We don't have time to go out and do research on whether a vaccine is safe and effective. Some of us do. I've seen them compare a flu vaccine, not to another flu vaccine, this is a brand new vaccine, to determine whether they should approve it. Okay, they didn't compare it to another flu vaccine to determine how well it worked. No, they compared it to the Tdap vaccine, and guess what? It prevented the flu better than a Tdap vaccine. Wow! If you're gonna do something completely irrelevant like that, why don't you use an inert saline placebo? Oh, because that might hide all the side effects. I'm a bitter boy. All right, so we stand on a crossroads in our history right now. The you-know-what is gonna be hitting the fan, and we need to do something about that. Make no mistake, we are at war. We are at war with a pharmaceutical industry that wants to profit at the cost of our health and the health of our children. A pharmaceutical industry whose entire purpose, this is their stated purpose, I'm not making it up, to have us all dependent on pharmaceuticals, at least 3 each. That's somebody else, my friend. This is a pharmaceutical industry that says, hey, don't worry about that autoimmune disorder you got from our COVID vaccine, because guess what? We have drugs for that. We're at war with the press that is controlled by that pharmaceutical industry. Don't believe me? Watch any news show and see what advertisements you're finding on that. They're gonna be for pharmaceuticals. What they want is everybody to be terrified. Everybody to be terrified. Why? Because it makes a population a lot more docile and easier to control. And worst of all, we're at war with our own legislators and public servants. It should never be this way. They serve at our pleasure. The founding fathers set up our government to make our government afraid of its citizens, not the other way around. If we don't take up and continue this fight against medical mandates, we will lose the freedoms that have defined this country. There should be 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people here worried about this. It's time to wake them up. Woo! And I'm going to ask you, because I know that you are the ones that are going to lead this forward. Never give up. Never give up. Don't forget what we're fighting for. We are sovereign citizens of this state and this nation. No one should ever be able to mandate what is injected into our bodies or the bodies of our children. Woo! Where there is a risk, there must be a choice. Keep fighting.
Let's give another huge thank you to Dr. New. Woo! Having worked in the field of occupational and environmental toxicology for over 17 years and combined involvement in public health, decontamination site management, and hazardous materials management, our following speakers spent 9 years on active duty and blew the whistle on unethical health and environmental hazards concealed from the public. While medically retired from previous fieldwork, she now dedicates her efforts as a health freedom activist and media correspondent and contributor. Please welcome Kristen Meghan.
All right, first I would like to apologize for needing to wear my sunglasses. The sun makes me sneeze and I definitely don't want to spread the COVID I do not have. So, as stated, I've been in this career field now for almost 18 years in the field of occupational and environmental toxicology. And I spent 9 years of that on active duty, and after that I spent 4 years for the federal government working in a VA hospital. So I've covered both the industrial and medical side of this career field. Now there's a saying in my career field, that where there's a standard, there's a hazard. But where there's a hazard, there's not always a standard. And the hazard I'm about to talk about needs a standard. And the way that we get that standard is through signing these petitions to control that hazard of our current governor. So I mentioned the whole where there's a hazard, there should be a standard. When it comes to this profession, guided by several alphabet agencies, there's something that must be followed, and that is called the hierarchy of safety and controls. And why is that important to you?
Hi, baby.
Well, while this mainly applies to the workplace, it also applies to the public. There is a hierarchy, and in that hierarchy, you must first attempt to eliminate a hazard. When you cannot eliminate that hazard, then you go to engineering controls. When you cannot afford or you cannot find engineering controls to reduce that hazard safely, then you implement administrative controls and PPE. Did you know that if an employer does not conduct a health risk assessment and a job demand survey to justify while you are in PPE, with completely ignoring the other tiers that I just mentioned, that can be an OSHA write-up? So why on earth did our governor jump straight to PPE and mandate it for everyone in the state when medically necessary? But we all know we're being turned around in stores for not wearing masks.
Awesome.
The issue here is that hierarchy exists because of medical reasoning.
Keep track of everybody's kids.
If you are forced to wear a mask in the workplace because of PPE, you have to get a medical evaluation. It's to look at your medical history, yes, but the primary reason for that appointment and that health physical is to determine what will you be doing in that mask. So if you're just a ship shopper, you think that's light administrative work. There's been a handful of ship shoppers that have passed out from loading groceries and working in the heat. That's a major issue. And it's a liability issue. And why MyOSHA is sitting there doing absolutely nothing, you should be concerned. But you should not be scared. And do you want to know why? Because there are laws within MyOSHA and there are laws within federal OSHA. And federal OSHA still can be upheld in court, even if they are too lazy to come out and deal with all the health risks out here.
Right?
One thing that has really bothered me is the amount of rhetoric on social media shaming those of you that don't wear masks. It's that same ideology, vaccines don't work unless you have yours. And the same reasoning for not vaccinating could be your medical history. And the same reasoning can apply to utilizing masks. It is not a farce, and it's not fake. When you're seeing these videos on social media of people utilizing pulse oximeters to look at their oxygen levels when they're wearing a mask.
Right?
And that's just for a few minutes. Did you know that masks like N95s and dust masks and nuisance masks are absolutely not designed to be worn greater than 4 hours? And in the workplace, every use and shift use, you must dispose of it. Because if you're not disposing of your homemade masks or reusing the ear loop masks, it's only stopping droplets from coming out. And while it's collecting the droplets, guess what it's doing? It's restricting airflow. And you are absolutely able to breathe in your own carbon dioxide.
Right? Yup.
Now, in the public, you think you don't hear a lot about it. In my 18 years in this field, I've seen people have heart attacks, I've seen people fall out, and I have seen deaths. I have had to testify to the usage of masks and with employers ignoring individual history. Did you know that if you cannot wear a mask in your workplace, your employer must try to reasonably accommodate that? And if they care so much about health, then they would buy you a PAPR. It's called a powered air purifying respirator, and it's what they use in disease wards. And that allows you to get proper oxygen. So the issue here, that's the discussion of liability, is we are all going to find out on June 30th what Whitmer is deciding to do with our schools. Now, yes, it's a huge freedom issue.
What she's deciding.
I am looking at it as a medical issue. Right? How many children are going to fall out at school?
Not mine.
If you go to the hospital and you're fall alert, you can't walk alone. These kids are going to be harming themselves and they're going to be touching their faces even more than ever. The whole idea of utilizing masks in school is completely mute. It does nothing that the governor is claiming to do. And speaking of the governor's claims, why has she not told us who is giving her information? I want to know what the credentials are of the people that have decided we're going to implement a one-size-all control for the public. And what's the scariest of all is me hearing that you need to wear a mask to protect other people. And people are telling people with respiratory issues that they should wear a mask. Wrong. You are the people who shouldn't be wearing a mask. And many people with respiratory issues have oxygen when needed or carry inhalers. Please stop getting your information from the local media. And if you're here, I'm sorry. But you're parroting information from lobbyists and bureaucrats. Not scientists who have no bias or benefits. I will tell this. I am asking you, Governor Gretchen Whitmer. As a veteran, I am asking you. As a scientist, I am asking you. Reveal the data which has allowed you to conduct a health and safety risk assessment to determine the last thing is the first thing. PPE should never, ever, ever be the first line of defense. And while she's at it, when she's fixing the damn roads, she better stay in her lane and leave it to the subject matter experts.
Give another huge thank you to Kristen and Meghan. Our next speaker, the founder of Michigan Freedom Keepers and a mother to a vaccine-injured child, she has committed her life to educating others about vaccines and the dangers associated with them. Give a warm welcome to Alyssa Berry.
Sorry.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes! I'm so thankful to be speaking here today and to be standing alongside so many Michiganders in this vital fight for medical freedom. If you would have asked me 3 years ago if I thought vaccines were dangerous, I would have either laughed and shrugged you off or instantly responded, no way. This is Andrew. He's gonna say hi. Vaccines were saved the world, had saved the world, or so I was taught to believe. The problem I would come to learn, and what many of us now know, is that the same exact vaccines we believed would save our children are the very reason they are so sick today. With a quick show of hands, how many people do we have here who have children or loved ones that have been injured by vaccines? Woo! Me too. My heart goes out to each and every one of you. You see, my son Andrew, right here, was vaccinated according to the CDC schedule, starting at just 8 weeks old, when he was given 3 pokes and 1 oral vaccine, for a total of 8 different diseases. 1 for each week of his life, I suppose. Where in nature would a baby be exposed to 8 diseases at one time, being a mere 8 weeks old? Exactly 1 week after that appointment, we had Andrew's very first sick visit with his pediatrician. He had been fussy, projectile vomiting, and had diarrhea for days. I was told he was having a reaction to my breast milk and sent home with samples of formula. No one, including myself, considered the injections for 8 different diseases he had just been given 1 week prior. Nope, after 2 months of life, being a champion breastfeeder, my milk was the obvious answer. Andrew started speaking when he was 9 months old. Mama came first, and Bubba soon after. Little did I know that after his 12-month vaccines, I would not hear those words again for more than a year. At his 1-year well check, Andrew received vaccinations for 5 different diseases. Hepatitis A, the MMR for measles, mumps, and rubella, and varicella, aka chicken pox, which ironically enough, he still contracted 3 months later. The first week following that appointment, we battled fevers up to 104 degrees, on and off. The pediatrician instructed us to administer Tylenol and to call and head to the ER if the fever ever refused to break. She was also sure to remind me that fevers are a normal reaction to vaccinations, and it simply means they are working. He began sleeping a deep sleep that was difficult to stir him from. All day, every day, he would lay on me with these hot, flushed cheeks and just sleep. During the nights, he began waking every 20 to 40 minutes and screaming these high-pitched screams that I will never forget. Not normal is right. Andrew stopped speaking. He stopped making eye contact. He started having 7 to 10 foul-smelling diarrhea diapers a day that were burning the skin off of his butt. He began banging his head off of the floor. He stopped seeking our attention and started obsessively spinning wheels. He had entered his own world and communicated exclusively through screaming for 7 long months, having lost all other means of communication. It was like the baby that I had nursed, soothed, and known for an entire year had been replaced with a complete stranger that I suddenly had nothing to calm him from. So we both just cried together. The healthcare industry failed my child, and I refused to sit back and watch his health decline further. I've spent the past year and a half nose deep in books, scientific studies, listening to the ACIP and legislative meetings, and listening to testimonials from all over this world with parents with stories eerily similar to our own. I began the process of healing my son. I obtained his medical records and filed reports with VAERS all on my own. His pediatrician refused to hear my concerns, went as far as to assure me that there wasn't even aluminum in the vaccines her office gives, when in fact, according to his medical record and the ingredients of the exact vaccines he received, within his first 12 months of life, Andrew was injected with 2,065 micrograms of aluminum, which is a classified neurotoxin. I am here to speak today to be a voice for Andrew and the many other victims of these risky liability-free products. When they took my son's voice, they forced me to find my own, and they will never have the comfort of my silence again. Our children deserve better, and their children deserve better.
Yes.
No drug is 100% safe for 100% of people 100% of the time.
Woo!
Where there is risk, there must be choice. Is it up to the government to decide what we are willing to risk our lives or the lives of our children for? No, it is not. The same government who won't even assume liability for the repercussions of the products that they themselves mandate. We are not just going to sit back and watch these mandates come to Michigan. We are going to fight this corrupt system that leaves families to pick up the pieces and fend for themselves in a sea of people ready to meet them with disbelief and ridicule. But not everyone is like that, and that is the note that I want to end this on today. How many people here have not been personally impacted by vaccine injury, but rather asked the questions, looked at the information, or simply believed mothers? I cannot thank you guys enough. Thank you for hearing us when the rest of the world turned a deaf ear. Thank you for being a friend when everyone else turned away. And more than anything, thank you for seeing our children, despite the world's attempt to keep them invisible.
Yes!
It is you who gives me hope for a future where my children can grow up healthy and not be seen as a threat. Thank you.
Let's give another big, huge thank you to Alyssa Berry. As a speech-language pathologist and autism specialist for 25 years, the following speaker has helped develop autism programs and centers in California, Oregon, and Washington State. In 2016, she learned the hard way that vaccine injury is not 1 in a million. And now she dedicates her life as an advocate and activist by educating parents, medical personnel, and lawmakers. She is the West Side Regional Director for Michigan for Vaccine Choice and the founder and director for Michiganders for Safe Technology. Please welcome Maija Hahn.
Good afternoon, my fellow Michigan patriots. It is so good to see you showing up here on the steps of our state capitol to tell our Michigan legislators we will not comply. We will not comply to mandatory masking. We will not comply to mandatory contact tracing. We will not comply to draconian measures for our children to receive an education. And we will not comply to a mandatory coronavirus vaccine. The last few months has been a real wake-up call to millions of Americans. This COVID-19 charade has literally taken our freedoms and liberties away in a matter of a few short weeks. We were banned from working. We were banned from providing for our families. We were banned from buying certain things and doing certain things. We couldn't even worship together. We couldn't be at our dying loved one's bedside, and we couldn't even attend their funeral. Within a matter of weeks, without any reliable data, the government and the media were able to fear us into giving away some of our most basic freedoms. And you know, at the beginning, we were all willing to do our part to help. When we were told this virus was going to kill millions of Americans. But as the data became more and more suspect, and those powers that be became more and more suspect, America began to wake up. We began to read the history of Dr. Fauci and the National Institute of Health. We began to see the CDC and the World Health Organization as more of a political wing with hidden interests than organizations that had any idea on how to care for and actually handle a global pandemic. And as we sat at home and we watched our bank accounts grow thin and our waistbands grow bigger, we began to read the horrific stories about Bill Gates and his international foundations that have literally sterilized 500,000 African women and killed and maimed countless children through forced vaccination programs. We began to see how the CDC and certain Democratic politicians were playing by the same playbook, such as placing COVID-positive patients into nursing homes, telling doctors to inflate COVID death numbers by grouping them together with other deaths, even when there was no way that death was related to COVID. We heard the stories from whistleblower nurses on the front lines saying they were witnessing hospitals literally killing patients due to improper care and pairing non-COVID patients with COVID patients. And then there's the massive monetary incentives that hospitals were given by the CDC to diagnose as COVID and to ventilate, knowing early on that ventilators were killing patients. Then we started seeing other scientists and doctors looking into the data for themselves. Through them, we learned the mortality rate was significantly overestimated. Through testing of asymptomatic COVID patient populations, we now know that if you are healthy, your chances of dying if you get COVID is significantly less than 1%. Most studies now show the mortality rate to be 0.1 to 0.26% if you get infected with COVID-19. Guys, is 0.1 to 0.2% mortality risk worth your freedom and your liberty? So this brings me back to why we are here today. This COVID charade has made every single one of us here suspect that the true underlying motive of this fear-mongering campaign has more to do with mandatory compliance and tracking and tracing, controlling and vaccinating all Americans. And we will not comply. You know, as a speech-language pathologist, I have been an autism specialist for over 20 years. In that time, I have seen the autism epidemic explode exponentially. In the early 80s, it was 1 in 10,000 children.
I'll be like this.
Then vaccine manufacturers became liability-free in 1986. Then suddenly, the great era of massive vaccine programs and production started, and children went from 22 vaccination doses in 1983 to 74 doses today. They added neurotoxic metal adjuvants like mercury and aluminum, and DNA-altering human aborted fetal DNA, and animal and human DNA that have confirmed retroviruses. With complete immunity, these vaccine manufacturers have gotten away with a complete lack of proper safety studies. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Del Bigtree's Informed Consent Network had to sue our own government's Health and Human Services to get the actual safety studies done that were for the CDC's recommended vaccine schedule. And do you know what they found? Not a single vaccine currently on the American childhood vaccine schedule has ever been tested safely against an inert placebo, nor has observed long-term adverse effects. All of the science done by these liability-free pharmaceutical vaccine companies are junk science. They are fraudulent and deceptive.
You know if that water spring? Mm-hmm. It is.
Are you aware that we have 2 whistleblowers now? One as the CDC's expert witness for the vaccine injury court, Dr. Andrew Zimmerman, and the other, Dr. William Thompson, who is still currently in the CDC, who was the head scientist on the MMR trials. You know, those government trials that the CDC says proves that vaccines do not cause autism? Those ones. So they have both submitted signed affidavits to Congress and the CDC that the CDC has lied, misrepresented, and even deceived. In the 90s, autism had grown from the 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 500. And those parents were screaming from the rooftops that the MMR vaccine had destroyed their perfectly healthy and developing children. Friends, I have known the CDC corruption much longer than the last few months. The greatest lie that has ever been told is that vaccines cannot cause autism. And to this day, the CDC has known it and yet refuses to come clean. They continue to let this lie as more and more children become permanently brain damaged. Friends, today autism is 1 in 36 children.
Unacceptable.
1 in 36. This is the true global pandemic. And why in the heck isn't the CDC, the World Health Organization, the National Institutes of Health, or anyone else shutting down the world and trying to stop this true pandemic? My friends, it does not stop there. Here in America, we have 1 in 7 kids with ADHD. 54% of American children have a chronic disease. We have the highest infant mortality rate in the first year of life here in the United States than any other country in the westernized world.
And we have the highest infant mortality rate on the first day of life than any of them combined. Yet, we are the most highly vaccinated society in the world. And we are the only country that requires a vaccine for a disease only spread by IV drug users and sexual transmission to a baby on the first day of their life. I wish I could say I started this fight for my autistic patients back in the 1990s. I wish I could say I have been a true advocate and voice for them for the past 20 years. But regrettably, I have not. It took a personal tragedy for me to finally look into the massive problems with our vaccination programs. Even after knowing and working with many families who had children that regressed into autism after vaccination, I still was not willing to go full board and no vaccinations for my own children. As a new mother, I was torn between what the doctors told me my child could die from a preventable disease, and knowing that some kids do have bad, irreversible damage. So what did I do? I bought a book. I got a book by Dr. Sears and did a delayed vaccine schedule. And that was the extent of my research, a single book. And I followed that schedule. And my son was chronically ill. He had gastrointestinal problems as an infant, and the doctors brushed off his colic. He developed apnea, and I had to stay up watching him night after night, worried he would stop breathing in the middle of the night. We eventually got an apnea monitor that would sound alarms to make sure that we woke in time to make sure he started breathing again. He projectile vomited all the time. I could not leave the house without 10 burp cloths and a change of clothes for him and myself. He suffered from high fevers and even hallucinations, but he was still neurologically intact, and I kept vaccinating. As an autism specialist, I was acutely aware when my smart, socially interactive boy stopped responding to his name. At the age of 2.5, my perfect and loving boy began to regress into himself and became more rigid with his behaviors, began repetitive speech patterns, and the dreaded sign, lining up toys. I told myself, well, it isn't the vaccines because we were on a delayed schedule and his last vaccines were a month ago. So even then, I refused to look at vaccines. And regrettably, I continued to vaccinate my son until his baby sister. At 2 months old, my baby girl, Katherine, received the recommended CDC vaccines, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, the Hib, the polio vaccine, the pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, the hepatitis vaccine, and the rotavirus vaccine. Believe it or not, that's what every 2-month-old new baby gets. The next day, she developed a high fever and vomiting began. 2 days later, she was in the hospital with an IV in her head. I asked the doctors, could this be a vaccine reaction she had a couple days ago? And what did the doctors say? No. I was naive, and I didn't think about vaccines again. Then we took her home, and a couple weeks later, she developed seizures called benign infantile spasms. She was hospitalized once again. Do you think that most doctors are trained that vaccine reactions are commonly delayed? No. They expect a reaction to be within 24 hours or it's absolutely not related to a vaccine. The science says otherwise. Her neurologist never said these seizures were caused by vaccines, but did say we should delay some vaccines, especially the DTaP, as those could make her spasms, her seizures, worse. Through my own research, I now know that infantile spasms are written on the DTaP vaccine insert as a possible adverse reaction. Did any doctor ever tell me that? No. And of course, the medical literature is very well documented that this is the case. So we delayed vaccinating until she was 4 years old. Meanwhile, Katherine developed 7 different food allergies and was basically sick her entire childhood. Those were also vaccine injuries. By age 4, her spasms had decreased, and her pediatrician pressured us into catching her up on her vaccines, telling me that she could not attend school without all of the vaccines for kindergarten. I was never told that there was an exemption. I was never told that she could even have a medical exemption to be able to attend school. So I reluctantly agreed, but I said, please no DTaP. Within 3 days, after her group shots at age 4, she developed severe facial tics. She would blink and scrunch her face literally every second. I immediately called her pediatrician in a panic. Now pay close attention. This is where the moment I realized I could no longer believe a thing her pediatrician told me. Her pediatrician said that there was no way that her tics were related to the vaccine she'd had 3 days ago. He said that there was probably the stress of the pokes that caused the tics. No joke. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but it gets worse. While I'm on the phone in a panic, watching my daughter's facial tics every second, I hear the doctor on the phone telling the nurse, tell her I have an opening this afternoon and she can bring her daughter back in to catch up on the rest of her vaccine since she's ticking anyway. That was the moment I began to doubt everything I was ever told about vaccines. That was when our journey of knowledge and education truly began. And since then, I have spent literally thousands of hours reading medical journals, research studies, legislative rulings, and learning the horrific truth that the CDC is recommending every child get injected with is causing major damage to our children. Tics, autoimmune diseases, seizures, neurotoxicity, encephalitis, rashes, paralysis, SIDS, asthma, eczema, allergies, learning disabilities, autism, ADHD, and more are all adverse reactions to vaccines. The depth of the HHS and see the outraged if you know what I know now. I wish I could tell you that Katherine's seizures and tics were the worst reaction my daughter had from vaccines. What we didn't realize is that Katherine's health nightmare had just begun. She developed a circular rash on her torso that no dermatologist could cure. She had that for a few years. And then the sun rashes started on her face. And we noticed that worse when we were vacationing down in the Caribbean, that the rash was so bad it scarred her poor, beautiful cheeks. We later discovered that Katherine developed lupus and is allergic to the sun because of the decision I made to vaccinate her. She has a lifelong autoimmune disease, has to endure countless invasive medical testing, and she's only 8 years old. My fellow patriots, mothers, grandparents, I appreciate you all being here and being willing to fight for our children and our fellow Michiganders to ensure we maintain rights to medical freedom. If we do not have freedom to bodily sovereignty, what do we have? We will not allow a corrupt government to take our freedoms nor our liberties. Will we allow tyrannical governments to take our children? No. Will you stand up with me and tell our leaders we will not comply to medical mandates. We will never stand down. We will fight for life from conception till death. We will not allow a corrupt and captured government to take our rights to choose what is injected in our perfectly provided God-given bodies. We are Americans. We are born free, and no government will ever take that away from us. Thank you very much.
All right, let's give a big round of applause to all our special guest speakers today. Thank you all for taking the time to come out and stand up for our freedoms. We all know how important it is to preserve our constitutional and basic human rights. And that is why we are here today. So thank you all for your support and for being dedicated to the truth. Thank you all for coming today. We are going to take a short intermission while we get ready to march. I don't know if anyone saw the Facebook post on our event, the itinerary. We are going to march. We'll head down that way and just head around the block. But first, we have the book giveaway for those who registered with a ticket. Our first pick is Angela Ray. Is she here? Angela? And our second pick is Margaret and Glenn Frobel. Okay, we'll go on to our next. So each three of the co-founders picked two people. So our second co-founder picked Jamie Herringa. Jamie Herringa, are you here? And Laura Epperson. Jamie's here? Okay. Laura, are you here? Okay. Our third co-founder, her first pick was Sydney Tepp. Sydney Tepp. I know, I seen her here earlier.
There she is!
Okay.
You won a book!
So Jamie and Sydney, you guys won a book. Please come up to the steps and we'll give that to you.
I know, she looks so cute. Okay, so what do you want to